Good morning, everyone. This is Jonion's News, and I'm Jacob. This morning we investigate the use of nuclear power in New Zealand. Labour have said that they want to have the electricity sector completely carbon-free by 2030. Nuclear power could be a great help to achieve that goal, but Labour is strongly against its use in New Zealand. We will investigate if or when power from the atom will be needed in New Zealand. We now hear from Jacob, who has found out the state of nuclear power in New Zealand.
New Zealand has always been a nuclear-free country, but the idea of nuclear power has been considered before. From 1969 to 1976, atomic energy was featured in the national power plans, but was decided against. This was done because it was decided that firstly, New Zealand didn't need the energy that a nuclear power station provided, and secondly was the cost. Nearly all the materials would have to be imported at a large cost, and even a small nuclear reactor would cost about 4.5 billion New Zealand dollars. Currently, Labour are quite clear on a no nuclear New Zealand and don't seem to have any shift room. So apart from nuclear, what are the other green power sources? Well, there are hydroelectric, wind farms, solar and geothermal power. We will now talk to Alex Martin, a project manager for Meridian Energy, who focuses on some of the hydroelectric power stations down in the South Island. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Jacob.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your understanding of electricity production?
About an 8, I'd say.
And what sort of work do you do in relation to the production of electricity?
Well, I work as a project manager for Meridian Energy Limited, and as part of my job, I carry out or manage major upgrades to hydro equipment. So that's the stations in the Mid-Waitaki and the Upper Waitaki, and also Manapori.
Can you see New Zealand electricity production being carbon neutral by 2030?
I think that's going to be a massive challenge, given the lead times on wind farms and other supply sources. I think it's also going to be a significant challenge, given that half of the carbon that's produced in New Zealand is by farming, and we can't do anything about that in the electricity sector.
And finally, do you think that nuclear power is a good option for New Zealand to take?
From what I understand of the financial side of it, I think probably no, not at the moment. New Zealand is really well positioned to have really good access to a lot of fairly cheap renewable energy, and I think it makes a lot of practical economic sense to exploit that technology before we start looking at more expensive technologies like nuclear that have also got a lot of kind of more serious impacts associated with them as well.
Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome, Jacob.
The US, Britain, France and many other countries all have nuclear power stations and are planning on making the most of the technology in the future. What would have to happen for New Zealand to start using nuclear power? We now hear from Grant Telfar, modelling and portfolio manager for generation and natural resources at Meridian, who will be answering that previous question in depth. Morning, Grant. So from what I understand, it's very unlikely for New Zealand to go down the path of nuclear energy.
A fault, the frequency, because our power system's so small, the frequency slams all over the place. So big size is not something we particularly enjoy. And those combined cycle gas plants I was talking about earlier, which tend to be sort of 300 to 400 megawatts, even they are really getting too big for the New Zealand power system. So ideally, you would want something smaller. So if the conventional technologies are too big, are there other nuclear technologies you use that could be smaller and modular? Of course there is. You can run a nuclear sub on them, right? So you can build them whatever size you want, but the trouble is at the moment, if the conventional ones are more expensive, the smaller, more modular ones, at least for now, are going to be more expensive again. And there are all sorts of new ideas and new technologies in the nuclear space that could change that. From there's sort of little pebble bed ones that China was talking about, which are only 100 or 200 megawatts there, and they're sort of inherently safe by design. There's re-examining the whole fast breeder cycle, and they're not in favour at the moment because they tend to produce weapons grade plutonium, and they're a far better way to do nuclear power, but you have that issue that you need to deal with. So the West has shied away from that, even though it's a superior technology. And you could use thorium. You don't have to use uranium. There's almost no end of sort of safer, more modular, different ways you could use nuclear power. But for New Zealand, we have to wait for someone with far deeper pockets than we do to land those new technologies. And of course, sitting in the background of all of this, you've got the holy grail of fusion, and the European sort of tokamak project, the ITER one, which is in wherever that is it Geneva, wherever it is, and that's a 50-year project. And if they can crack that, then sort of waste-free, no issues, fusion better than fission, it's sort of game on at that point. But they've got a long way to go there, and they may never get there. So never say never, but the conventional technology, crudely speaking, is sort of the same as it was in the 60s and 70s, and it's just not really fit for the New Zealand power system and too expensive. And some of these other new technologies may change that, but that's probably 10, 20 years away at this point. And it would take someone like China or India. In China in particular, we're looking quite hard at this to have different type of technology and different size to station size that would then fit New Zealand's needs extremely well. And that would be an interesting problem to have. But at the moment, we don't have a pressing need for green electrons that aren't wind, solar and geothermal.
Thank you very much, Grant. So, in conclusion, we can safely say that nuclear energy will most likely not be coming to New Zealand anytime soon. There are better solutions to issues New Zealand may find with electricity in the future. We can't rule it out because we don't know what could happen with the technology and maybe make it more appropriate for New Zealand. Until then, our current power sources are perfectly adequate to cope with any increases in demand.
Thanks, Jacob. Interesting to hear about all the factors that play a part in the choice to use nuclear. We now know that it is not right for New Zealand due to the demand for power and the other options available. I hope you have found this interesting or informative. Goodbye from us here at Jonyon's News.
Kia ora, I'm George Matthews, the reporter for BBC News, and this is Elite Athletes and How to Make Them, with Chris Miller, Head of Strength and Conditioning at Christ College, and Tony O'Connor, a retired Olympian and four-time world champion rower from Ireland. For elite athletes, the chance to compete at the world's most prestigious level carries an enormous cost. Decades of training, sacrifices and dedication lead to a brief moment of competition that will occur far in the future.
Kia ora, I'm George Matthews from BBC News, and this is my report on elite athletes. For elite athletes, the chance to compete at the world's most prestigious level carries an enormous cost. Decades of training, sacrifices and dedication lead to a brief moment of competition that will occur far in the future. This article provides insight into what previous elite athletes have experienced and what they believe makes a successful person. I'll be interviewing Chris Miller, Head of Strength and Conditioning Coach at Christ College, Canterbury in New Zealand. G'day, Chris.
Hi, George.
What do you believe it takes to become an elite athlete?
So, to become an elite athlete, I think there's two avenues. Obviously, an element of natural talent and ability for whatever the sport you play, and then secondly is obviously the work ethic to train hard, train smart, and also the perseverance to continue training when the times get tough. Treating it almost as a journey, not thinking too far ahead, but taking every day as it comes, the process of training and actually, I guess, making your life revolve around becoming a professional athlete.
Yeah. Do you believe anyone is able to become a professional athlete?
Again, going back probably to the first answer, when you talk about anyone, I think there's an element of natural ability.
Yeah.
I think that if you look at the very elite sports people in the world, they are the natural talent plus the ones that work hard. There is a chance for those that have let's say an average level of talent, if they do work hard or work harder than the people who also participate in that sport. So I guess I would say probably not everyone is able to be, but in saying that, people not necessarily do you have to be the most talented to become a professional athlete or an elite athlete.
What is the best advice you would give to someone who aspires to become a professional athlete?
I think the biggest thing is that you have to decide that you really want to be a professional athlete. Being a professional athlete is not an easy thing. I think, especially nowadays, it takes a lot of commitment and it takes a lot of your time and focus to be a professional athlete, and even to work towards being a professional athlete. I think I said in the first answer, we talk about to get to that level of professionalism, it's almost you sacrifice aspects of your life to be able to train hard and learn and improve yourself. So it's probably something that if you do have the talent or you do have the want to do it, then you have to also commit to doing it. The commitment's a big thing. Yeah. So I think decide and commit, and then be patient as well. I think a lot of times it's sort of thinking, I'm going to get there next year, or I'm going to be there at this point. It's a long journey as well. So
you can't be the best over a night. Can't become the best in just one night.
No, definitely not. No, I think it takes a lot of work. So something like that.
Yep. Well, cheers, sir.
No worries, George.
Next, I interview Tony O'Connor, a 5-time world champion rower from Ireland, to get his perspective. G'day, Tony.
G'day, George.
And I'll be interviewing you on elite athletes. So what do you believe it takes to become an elite athlete?
I think one of the main things is stubbornness. It's not plain sailing. And you have a lot of ups and downs, and you probably have more downs than ups if you're like me, or like most athletes, and you You don't necessarily have to start off thinking you want to be an elite athlete, but it's quite dangerous thinking long term. But I think you should have intermediate steps and intermediate goals. Maybe starting off as being, captain of your team, then maybe winning the cup, then being a national representative at junior level, and then working your way up. And it's all well and good trying to think you're going to, win the World Cup or be an Olympic champion when you're 14, but there's a lot of steps in between. So being in for the long haul is really important, and taking the ups and downs.
What is the best advice you'd give someone who aspires to become a professional athlete?
Well, I think that anyone who starts off might have a dream to be a professional athlete, but they don't really know what it takes. So education is really important in terms of talking to people who know, listen to people who have advice, and basically being quite humble and accepting that you don't know anything and you need to learn a lot before you become a professional athlete.
Yeah. How much of your talent came naturally?
For me, bugger all.
Really?
Very little, yeah. In my sport, as you know, hard work really trumps all.
Yeah.
You do have to have a bit of a natural ability to have rhythm and timing and stuff like that, but I really like it because I think, unlike some maybe ball sports, basketball or rugby or whatever, hard work, just pure hard work, and that will get you a long, long way.
What sacrifices did you have to make?
Well, that's a good question, because people have asked me that before, and I look back on the years I rode as an international athlete, and a sacrifice by definition is something that you're giving up.
Yeah.
And that is in some way a bad thing. And I wouldn't have changed anything. I don't think there was any sacrifices.
Yeah.
Okay, you didn't get to go out and have beers every Friday night because you were training the next morning. But look at the alternative. You got to go out in the lake with your mates and go to countries abroad, and there was no sacrifices at all. I'd do it all again.
The question becomes, do you have the discipline to make the necessary choices on a regular basis to achieve the things you want? It's not easy, but if you can discipline yourself to consistently put in the effort to make it to the next level, the odds you have will increase drastically. Few are willing to make that choice.
The question becomes, do you have the discipline to make the necessary choices on a regular basis to achieve the things you want? It is not easy. However, if you can discipline yourself to consistently put in effort to make it to the next level, the odds you have will increase drastically. Few are willing to make that choice.
I'm Tyger McKinnon, reporting live for BBC News. Tonight we will be investigating the effects of sports injuries on children. Sports is commonplace in schools, with most sports schools having sports compulsory. But with every sport, injuries plague the players. These injuries can be especially harmful to children. We will now switch to Tiger McKenna to talk to some people on this matter. I'm Tiger McKenna reporting on the effects of sports injuries on children, and I'm here with Tommy Ralston. Tom, you've had a bad history of ankle injuries. Were most of them sports related?
Yes, they have been. Quite a lot of them, but some of them have been affected in everyday life, and I have rolled my ankles and done my knees in other ways.
Have these injuries affected your life outside of sports?
Yes, greatly. I haven't been able to run properly for many years, and this has affected me physically as I've permanently damaged some parts of my body and may need to have surgery in the future to product at the same level I am currently.
Do these past injuries still affect you today?
Yes, heavily, as I can't run properly and I find it difficult to change direction sometimes without the aid of strapping tape and ankle braces.
Do these injuries affect your mental health?
Yes, they have, as sometimes when I'm in a lot of pain because of these injuries, it can make it difficult to focus and product highly on the field or in the boat, and because of this, it is sometimes more difficult and affects my mental health.
Did it affect your mental health that you couldn't play sports?
It was very frustrating to not be out there, as I wasn't able to show the coaches and my teammates I could product and I could be helpful. It's also stressful, as most sports people know. You really want to be out there and you really want to stay in the team, and because of this, you need to be out there.
Tom's past injuries have caused his ankles to be weaker and more injury prone. He may need to have surgery in the future to prevent further weakening. I'm Ty McKenna, here with Gus Eglinton.
Hello, Ty, my friend. How's it going?
Good, thanks, Gus. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Good. Now, have you ever played through a sports injury?
Yes, I have indeed.
What injuries did you get?
So I've had a few injuries in my past. I've had a avulsion fracture in my hip, where it's basically the muscle pulls the bone off the muscle, and then I've had a stress fracture on my foot and a stress reaction in my back.
That's quite an extensive list of injuries there. Most of them sounding quite serious. Did you get these in sports?
Yes, I did, unfortunately. Well, one of them was track and field, which, does that count as sport? Running in the 100-metre sprints? If it does, I've sustained all three from sports.
Nice. Do these injuries still affect you today?
Yes, a few of them do. Sometimes, they niggle you a little bit from time to time, but that's about it. I've got,
Okay. Did having these injuries affect your mental health?
Of course, it affected your mental health. Obviously, you're quite sad because you might not be able to do some stuff that you could do before you had the injury, and it also affected my mental health because I was stuck inside, not doing anything, for a little bit. So that made me feel sad.
Did it affect? I'm here with Sarah Campbell, who is a paediatric physio who works for the Ministry of Education. Now, Sarah, how does a sports injury occur?
Well, Ty, there's two main ways that it happens in children. Are we talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously there's an acute injury, which is just like any other sports injury. That's a contact injury or a fall. So those are things like, particularly in children, head injury, which is from mostly biking, skating and horse riding, according to the ACC's website, or the quite commonly ACL injuries in knees and shoulder dislocations or concussion, like I've said. And then the main cause of injury in children is stress and on a joint, and so that is because children have an immature musculoskeletal system, so that can cause two main types of injuries. One is that an overuse injury, because quite commonly these days there's early specialisation in children, so they do intensive training too young, and that repeated action causes stress on that part of the body, and so that can cause stress fractures.
A stress fracture is a tiny crack in the bone caused by repetitive force, such as jumping or long-distance running.
Where bone grows, and so it's weaker, and that can be prone to injury. And the other area of injury is musculoskeletal wise, is because bones grow faster than muscles, and so the children are more susceptible to musculotendinous injuries like Sever's disease, which is at the growth plate of the heel, or Osgood-Schlatter syndrome, which is a knee growth injury.
What are the effects of having a sports injury for children?
Okay, so the growth plate stress, like that I've been talking about, can causes irregular widening of the growth plate, or irregular growth of the growth plate, and that means that can actually cause permanent damage. It may even cause the bone to stop growing earlier than it should do, or worst case scenario, it can cause deformity, so it can grow irregularly and then not fully recover, so it can develop incorrectly. The other thing that can happen with too much high intensity training is that the bone mass can even reduce, so the bone just becomes not as strong as it should be. And also too much high intensity training can cause delay onset of puberty. So the other issues is that you can get stress fractures. So that's when when the bone is repeatedly stressed in a certain way, and it causes little micro fractures in the bone, and then they take 6 to 8 weeks to heal, but if you don't allow them to heal properly, they can actually become more chronic and can become larger fractures.
Sweet. How would getting these sports injuries affect the child later in life?
Well, certain injuries can potentially cause osteoarthritis later in life. For example, recurrent shoulder dislocations. So once the joint has been dislocated once, it becomes looser because the ligaments and tendons around it and the capsule that keep the head of the humerus in the actual socket of the scapula become loose, so then it can repeatedly dislocate, and that can damage the joint, and often it would need reconstructive surgery. And so all of those things, the damage and the surgery, can lead to osteoarthritis further down the track. And same with ACL or anterior cruciate ligament injuries of the knee or the meniscus. They can also cause osteoarthritis, but as I said before, they can also cause the growth plate to be damaged, which can affect growth. And then there's also sprains and strains around ankles can do the same thing. The ligament laxity can then cause the injury to keep reoccurring, which can cause increased risk of those things happening again and again. And the other big thing that can cause an effect later on in life is just the psychological effects of having those injuries. And so, burnout, like if you're doing high intensity training from a young age, and then sometimes that can cause a loss of confidence and burnout and just a lack of interest in stopping enjoying sport.
Sweet, thank you very much.
That's all right.
Thanks, Tig. Sports are great for children as it helps with coordination, health and teamwork. And every able child should play a sport at least once in their life. But everyone needs to be aware of the risks that come with playing sport and how they can affect them later in life. Thank you for watching.